Father Vazken is an ordained priest of the Armenian Church and founder of In His Shoes Ministries, a faith-based organization which rallies support for those who suffer in the world. In His Shoes was created in response to acts of genocide perpetrated against the Armenian nation in 1915, with a fundamental belief that those who have suffered evil has a unique responsibility to take action against injustice to others. For over 30 years, Father Vazken has served the Armenian church communities in the Silicon Valley, Pasadena, and currently in Glendale at the St. Peter Youth Ministries Center. He has studied at the Monastery of Holy Echmadzin, Armenia, and graduated from the University of Southern California with degrees in psychology and social ethics. Please welcome Father Movsesian.
See if I can get this started, and if it doesn't, I promise I will abandon it.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, it's not gonna cooperate, but okay, շնորհ եւ արժանապատիվ եղբայրներ Քրիստոս եւ հարգելի հյուրեր. Good evening, everyone, distinguished guests and family, Armenian brothers and sisters. It is truly an honor to be here, and I want to thank you all for inviting me today. It's an extra privilege and an honor for me because this monument has been such an important part of my life. At age 8 or 9, my father was on the committee to erect this monument, so we wouldn't see him at night. He would go out to these monument committee meetings, and a few years ago when they told us that there would be a plaque up there, today I got to see it with his name on there, and it just made me feel so beautiful, so great that in a way that we did something 50 years ago that wasn't just about the past, and that's not what this is about. This is not about the past. This is about honoring the past, but also respecting our today. Did you see Green Card today? This is Armenia living right now. In your face, Turkey, we are alive today, right? This is it. And not only about recognizing today, but establishing our tomorrow. And that's what I want to share with you today. And I want to share with you some ideas about what it means to be an Armenian today, what it means to be in light of this genocide, growing up Armenian. What Dr. Marashlian shared with us today, it never amazes me whenever I hear him speak, the many different new things that you would think there's nothing new about the genocide. But today, what did we hear today? That the Speaker of the House, Boehner, went to Turkey and said, don't worry about it. We are not going to write history. Can you imagine Boehner telling African Americans, don't worry, forget about slavery. There was no such thing. We're not going to write history. Can you imagine Boehner going up to Jewish Americans and saying, hey, you know what, we're not going to write history. But somehow when they do it to Armenians, it's okay. And I'm here to tell you it's not okay. Now, at least not on my watch, and I know not on your watch. And I want to share with you a few ideas today. I was hoping that we'd get it did work. Okay, we got the full screen. Back in 2006, I was invited by Dr. Don Miller, you probably remember his name if I told you what he wrote. He wrote the book Survivors. He interviewed over 100 Armenian survivors, him and his wife Lorna, and it's been documented. And he's a professor at USC, and I studied under him. And he called me after about 20 years after my graduation. He said, Father Vazken, we're going to Rwanda. Are you interested in joining us? And there's about 8 people from USC going. And I thought about it for a minute. Why would I want to go to Rwanda? And I thought, these people have gone through a genocide 10 years ago. What would it be like if I was back in Armenia in 1925? And I thought if I could go to Rwanda in 2006, a decade after the genocide, maybe I can get some clues about what life would have been like back in Armenia 10 years after the genocide. What would I have found? Who would I have found there? What were the people like? And What I want to share with you this evening is really an awakening and give me purpose of who I am and what I am. Let me share with you, first of all, this is Kigali. This is the capital of Rwanda. After 23 hours in airplanes that took us on the other side of the globe. If you want to know where Rwanda is, imagine Africa and then put your finger right in the middle of it. It's right on the equator, and we were there on March 20th, which happens to be the equinox as well. So we were right there in this heart of Africa, right on the equator, and this place had seen genocide. After 23 hours in the plane, we get there, and you know where they take us? The first place they take us. Where would you think? I mean, you know, let's put them in the hotel, go up there, get relaxed a little bit. How about some food? No, guess where they took us? The first place, to the Genocide Memorial Museum. 10 years ago, they had genocide. Well, of course, it's important in their life. So they took us to the Genocide Memorial Museum. And I don't know if we're going to get full shots over here. Okay, great. This is the Memorial Museum. A big area of concrete. And we're walking around until we turned one corner. And what do we see there? We see that what we're walking on are mass graves. What do you do when you have 1 million people die? Where do you put them? And so they had created these giant mass graves. And each one of these coffins had 10, 20 people, bones, the remains of these people. Okay, so we're seeing this, and I'm looking at this, and it's tragic. Genocide, you know, as was explained today, it's not like war. Genocide is a systematic program of annihilation. You decide you're going to get rid of a whole group of people. And if you've seen the movie Hotel Rwanda, that made it famous, what was happening in Rwanda. Because unfortunately, the Rwandans were just like the Armenians. People didn't want to see. They closed their eyes, their ears, and their mouth. And so I go inside of the Genocide Memorial Museum. And guess what I start reading over there? I started reading the stories of these young children. And you know what? They were exactly the same stories that I had heard. I am the grandchild of genocide survivors. Every story that I read here was exactly the same stories my grandparents had told me. In the middle of the night, the men would be rounded up. The women were raped. The children were taken away. Same stories. And like a little baby, I'm sitting there in this museum crying because I'm reading these stories and I'm imagining this little kid here. I figured this is like my grandfather. My grandfather wasn't an old man the way I remember him. He was 6, 7 years old when the genocide happened. And so like a little baby, I'm sitting there in this Rwandan museum and I'm crying. And something happened there, and I want you to always remember this because it changed my life. A young lady came up to me and she said, they speak in French over there. She said, "May I help you? Is everything all right?" She was one of the staff of the museum. And I said, "No, I'm fine." And she says, "Why are you so upset?" And I said, "Because my grandparents were genocide survivors." And what she said next is something that should haunt especially the young people. She said, "Which genocide?" Can you imagine we're in the 21st century and we're still talking about which genocide? And I said, "The Armenian Genocide." And she said, "Well, have you gone upstairs?" I said, "No, I've just been going." She says, "Come with me." She took me upstairs. She opened up this door to the upstairs. There is a room dedicated to the Armenian people in Rwanda. Look at that. You know what pictures those are? The same pictures that we see. Derzor. Armenia, it says up there. Guess what? In Rwanda, we're the heroes. Right down the street over here, I'm glad that West LA applauds the genocide, but you know in West LA there's the Museum of Intolerance, and there's not one little exhibit about Armenians. Not one here in America. In a museum that was created by Governor George Deukmejian, there's not one word. And in Rwanda, there's a whole room, an exhibit about Armenia. And I'm amazed. And I'm going through and I'm looking at these pictures, all the same pictures that you and I have all seen, you know, the mothers walking through the deserts. And so this was my first day in Rwanda, and I said, this is going to be life-changing, and it was. So as the days went, I saw that there were so many different opportunities for me to compare Armenia and Rwanda. The next day, I met with children. Look at these children. Can you see it okay? Is this light? I hope it's not bothering you. These children were just like my grandparents. Look at the smiles on their face. They didn't have Wii's. They didn't have, at that time it was Nintendo and there was Sony PlayStation. They didn't have iPhones, but look at those smiles. And you know what they're playing with? It's a piece of garbage. It's a bunch of paper that they've taken and they've put rubber bands and they've made a ball, top. Look at that. The smiles, the clean, there's no dirt on them. This was like our grandparents. They had badiv. They had badiv. This is the problem of living in Glendale. I can't think in English. Pride. Okay, badiv. That really is a problem in Glendale. And look at the pride that they have. And not a pride like, hey, look at me, but a pride in life. And this is what my grandparents gave me. This is what my grandparents gave all of us. This is why we're here tonight. Because we understand what it means to be an Armenian. It's not about just putting a flag from year to year, but wearing that flag inside of our hearts. And so I met these kids, and they started telling me stories about the genocide. Then they took me to the River Nile. Do you know what they called the River Nile? The Red Nile. Wow. Just like we called it the Red Euphrates. And you know what stories they told me? How the women would go there, and they would jump in the water instead of being raped. How the Nile became so red because it was filled with blood. Every story we've heard about the Euphrates, they talked about at the Nile River. And then they took me to some very difficult places for me, where they had exhibited the skulls of people who they couldn't identify. This one skull that you see over here, it's been bashed. They told me that's done with a machete. In other words, there's ways of killing people. You take the machete, and the machete, they told me, is not sharp. You just you hit the person until you break their skull open. And this was the way that they did it. You talk about inhumanity, I was starting to see, until I saw the next group of skulls. These were baby skulls. And I asked them, why babies? And you know what their answer was? Because they grow up to be the enemy. After about 3 days, I realized something very interesting. I had not met anybody with gray hair. Well, obviously, they went through genocide. The only people that were left were the kids. So I was meeting people that were about 20 years old at this time, 10 years later. And they took me to a village, and in this village, there was a group of women who all had gray hair. They had been isolated. And they said, why don't you get up, Father Vazken, get up and say a few words to these ladies. So I got up and, what are you going to say? There's about 200 people who've all been through genocide. And I looked at them, I said, I'm a priest. They're mostly Catholic, 90% are Catholic in Rwanda. I said, I'm a priest of the Armenian church. They looked at me, they smiled. And then I thought I'd impress them. I said, our church was founded in the year 40 by the apostles Thaddeus and Bartholomew. They looked at me, and then they translated. Somebody said, this church was founded in French. They said his church was founded in 1940. I said, no, not 1940, 40. And they go, yeah, that's nice. And then I didn't know what to say. I just looked at him, and I just got filled with emotion. And I said, I'm looking at you, and I see my grandparents, I see my grandmothers. And I hope that when you look at me, you could see your grandchildren, that one day you're going to get out of this place. You're going to get out of this depression, out of this sadness. And it was at that point that they started talking. They started engaging with me. They started applauding. And all of a sudden, they started telling me what they wanted. And you know how we feel when somebody says, when we ask them, what do you want? We expect them to give us a list, and then we'll go to Costco and buy those things. You know what they wanted? They just said, don't forget us. Think about us every so often. Every time you talk about your genocide, remember our genocide. Now this picture over here, can you all see this picture? This is a very important picture because they're all raising their hand. After I spoke, one of the leaders got up and he said, why don't you speak, why don't we talk to the women over here? And so they asked the women, they said, how many of you are widows? And they all raised their hands. That's not what they're asking over here. That's not what they're raising their hands to. The next question was the important one. They said, how many of you have HIV/AIDS? And that's what they're answering. So the reason why these people were allowed to live was the final act of genocide. They didn't need to kill these people. They kept them alive so that they would infect the rest of the population. This is inhumanity. This is what genocide is all about. And what I have to share with you today is that, you know what? I'm not looking for anybody to tell me this genocide happened or it didn't happen. Is there anybody who doubts it? There shouldn't be one person. And we have to start respecting ourselves and understanding that we have an obligation in the world. Because the next thing that they did is after this thing got up, each one of them came up and started giving me a hug. And I'm going to change the picture because I'm embarrassed of that shot of me. But it gave me the opportunity to know that we are something very special as Armenians. And it's not about the past. It's about what we are and who we are today. The young man who spoke from Mesrobian today, I'm from Ferahian, so I will never take off my hat to a Mesrobian seat, except today. Today I will. What an incredible speech that was, because what did he say today? He said, don't get off of your pads, don't get off of your laptops, don't get off of your phones, get on them and start telling the world. Start telling the world who we are. Not by saying, come and recognize us. That's important. That's very important. And thank God we have so many organizations that are doing. Get active in there. But also alongside of that, get out there and help people. Get out there and do the things that we've been taught. We are an Armenian Christian community from the year 40. We have Christ who gives us this one little example of saying, guess what? Love is more powerful than all the hatred out there in the world. Love will conquer the evil in the world. And guess what? We just saw it. Easter was last week. Guess what? With a crucifixion, there was a resurrection. Now it's up to us to be standing out there. And so I'm inviting you today to become real Armenians. To become real Armenians in the sense of living the faith. Going out there and hugging the people that need the hugs. Every month we're out on the streets of LA feeding the homeless. And you know what? Every month invariably somebody comes up to us and says, how come you're doing this? And we say, we take a moment there and we say, because at one point we were homeless. You know what they used to call us? The starving Armenians. Guess what we do now? You know California, the Central Valley? Do you know who owns it? The Armenians. We feed the most of the world. What starving Armenians? Okay, we are now past resurrection. We are now ascending. Okay, we are ascending and we have a responsibility to the rest of the world. And like it or not, that word responsibility is something that we have to accept. To get out there and be responsible. To help people wherever they are. And it doesn't matter who they are. What I showed you today are my black brothers and sisters. I never thought this in my life, but I became colorblind in Rwanda, because every one of them that I saw over there was like my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather. Each of them were the same stories with one difference. Their skin color was different, but guess what? It didn't matter. And that's how we've got to be. We are the citizens of the world. Armenians are the shining star of this world. We are the people that have to be out there giving that example to the world that we saw the crucifixion, we are here at resurrection, and we are ascending. And that's the spirit that lives on in me. And in the shadow of this monument today, I am honored to share that message with all of you. God bless you, and God bless the Armenian people.